I've taken inspiration from some of my favourite Michelin-style chefs to create what I think is the perfect steak and ale pie. One of Britain's most classic dishes. So we're going to be using beef cheek as well as everyone's favourite short rib beef. They give it the best texture. Obviously you get the benefit of cooking meat on the bone using the short rib, and you've got all that beautiful fat and connective tissue. And then you've got that luxuriousness of the beef cheek. It almost goes like slightly fudgy and delicious and breaks down and really soaks up all that beautiful ale sauce. So we're going to take a heavy bottom pan, just get that on a low heat. It's all about adding layers of flavour to our sort of braise, because effectively this is a braise. Not too dissimilar to that of a bourguignon. The principles are very similar. We're just going to play around with different flavours and slightly different techniques. So we're just going to flour our meat very gently on all sides, not over the top. This is going to help to achieve a nice deep crust as well as thicken our sauce slightly as it cooks. We don't want too much excess flour because that will stop the meat caramelizing if there's a massive layer of flour on there. So we just want a nice light dusting. You can pretty much use anything. Traditionally designed to utilize all your cheaper cuts because it can transform the lesser cuts into something really special. But we're trying to take the same principles of that dish but apply it with some premium products, all that going to add different things to give a really truly special pie. We're going to go in with the beef. Nice, not too hot, as I mentioned. We want to build a nice caramelization on there. One of the reasons we're using the short rib is we're also going to play around with the presentation. It's obviously got a nice bone, so we're going to utilize that bone when we build our pie to add a nice bit of theatre to the dish. We got that idea from Robin Gill, who's an Irish chef. He has a couple of restaurants in London. He does a very similar thing, but with bone marrow. And as you can see on the beef cheeks here, you've got a lot of connective tissue. All that collagen is going to break down and enrich our sauce. So that's what we're after here on the beef, that like nice golden caramelization. And when you've achieved it on all sides, then we'll remove it and then keep going again with the rest of the meat. It's about adding depth and adding flavour and adding caramelization through that Maillard reaction on the outside of the meat. You can still get a very nice flavour without searing it, but it's just a slightly different end product. Right, last bit of cheek is going in. While that's going, I'm just going to start to dice up my mirepoix. Again, I'm just going to keep this quite chunky because I want to pick this out later on. To maximise my sauce and the finished product, I want a really perfect sauce. So I'm going to braise the meat before removing it and then finishing my sauce. So I'm just going to keep my onions nice and chunky, my carrots nice and chunky. Okay, once our meat is seared, we're going to remove that from the pan. Then we're just going to turn our pan off and we're going to go in with our vegetables. I'm going to pop the lid on our pan, and what this is going to do is it's going to create some steam from the vegetables going into the pan, which is hot. The water content from the vegetables is going to leak out and help to steam off the fond from the bottom of the pan. So now we're going to put the heat back on our pan now and just roast the veg in the bottom of the pan. So we're just going to get a little bit of colour on these. You get scrape off all that goodness off the bottom of the pan. We're not looking for a huge amount of colour off these vegetables. We're just looking to mostly soften them ever so slightly and lift a bit of that caramelisation off the bottom of the pan. Just going to put a touch of oil in there as well just to get it going. So once the veg is starting to get a little bit of colour, we're going to go in with a bit of rosemary and a little bit of thyme into the pan as well. A little pinch of sea salt, give that a few seconds. And then tomato puree. Just cook it out slightly. So just taking your time at this stage, it's just going to help to develop the flavour. But just to get the meat into the oven, you're probably looking at 30 to 40 minutes. And then you've actually got to make your pie thereafter. So, you know, it's a big commitment. You're looking at the best part of a day to try and get this sorted. Once your tomato puree is nicely caramelised, we're just going to pour out that veg onto a tray. So we're going to go in first with a half bottle of red wine. Obviously, the better quality you put in, you're going to get a better end product. And then we're going to go in with 2 pints of ale. So we're using Guinness. This is the stout that we have on the menu here at Fallow. Scrape off the bottom of the pan to release any extra flavours. And we're going to reduce this by half. Reducing it separately just gives you a little bit more control to reduce it to the desired consistency. So Marco actually used this tip. Okay, once your wine and your Guinness has reduced by half, so that should take you around about 10 minutes or so on a rapid boil. Then we're just going to evenly disperse our vegetables back into the pan, dot our meat in and around that. We're then going to add some Worcestershire sauce, the generous sort of glug, around about 75 ml of Worcestershire sauce. It's quite salty, quite strong. We're then going to leave that heat on low because we want to bring it up to a simmer, and then we're going to go in with some stock straight into the pan. We're just going to use this stock to cover the beef. We're using beef stock here, but you could also use chicken stock. Probably want a dark chicken stock rather than a light chicken stock. So we're going to make sure that we've got plenty of stock in here. Make sure the meat is fully submerged. And worst case scenario, you have too much and then you can save it for the next one. Now the reason we bring it to a simmer now is just because it just gets the cooking process going a bit faster. So we're going to place this into the oven set at 140 degrees and that should take around about 6 hours. If you're out of the house a bit longer, you can easily lower that temperature and just give it a little bit longer. Likewise, if you're in a bit of a rush, you could have it sort of 160. I wouldn't go much higher than 160, but that might take you again 4 or 5 hours at that point. So this pie is very much a two-stage process. So we need to cook the meat and then we're going to remove the meat, cook it before we can start to build the pie. Wouldn't be a braise without a cartouche. Fold our paper over, measure that to the center of our pan. This does absolutely fuck all, but it looks cool. If by now you're not sure of what a cartouche does, then you really need to go back and watch some of our other videos. Now, all jokes aside, cartouche is basically it helps to keep the meat submerged, stop the liquid evaporating too quickly, and just keeps everything nice and tidy underneath the lid. Cool, so lid on. I'm going to place it into the oven. Okay, on to the pastry part of our pie. So we're going to be making a suet pastry for this. So this is actually a recipe from our very good friend, Knox, who is a master pie maker. So in here we've got our plain flour, a generous pinch of salt. As always, all the quantities for any of these recipes you're going to need are in the description below. So we're then going in with some unsalted butter and some beef dripping. Just massage the two together until we get a nice sandy consistency. So just rub the flour and the suet between your fingers over and over again. This is why I am not a pastry chef. You can use shop bought. So just going to keep rubbing this in between your fingers like so, and eventually it will turn to the consistency of sort of like dry sand. Once you've mixed in your butter and your suet, we're then going to add our water into this. And then we're just going to bring it together. Whenever you're adding water, you always want to just add most of it, but always save a little bit back just in case. You can always add a little bit extra water, but if you add too much, you'll never get it back. And once it all comes together, then you can pour it out onto your bench. Just pick up the last few bits of crumbs, and then we're going to cling film this. We want a nice pastry that's nice and short, so we're not going to overwork it. So we're just going to bring the dough together, shape it nicely before wrapping it and placing it in the fridge. Ideally, you want to do this overnight, but a few hours will be fine. So that's going to go into the fridge to rest, as I said, ideally overnight. Now this is an element of a pie we saw from Chef Tom Shepherd, who has a Michelin-style restaurant called Upstairs. And he layers his beef and ale pie with layers of caramelised onion. Touch of oil in our pan, a couple of knobs of butter. Always like to season most things at the beginning because it helps to break down the cooking process and seasons while you're cooking rather than just adding it at the end, which is a good tip for most things, to be honest with you. Start them off on a high heat, and as the water content comes out of the onion, then we'll just turn it down and slow it down as they start to cook down. After about 2 hours, your onions should look like this, and then we can set these aside, ready to build our pie. So once our beef is cooked, we're just going to let this cool down in the stock for about an hour. And what that's going to do is stop the meat from drying out. If you take the meat directly out of the stock when it's hot, it will steam dry and it will lose some of its moisture. By letting it cool naturally in the stock, it's going to release its juices into the stock and stay nice and moist. So we can just get rid of our cartouche, RIP. Then we're very gently going to remove our beef and pass our sauce through a chinois. So your meat should be beautiful and soft. Look at that. A little treat. Just a little chef's nibble. That's what you get in this ox cheek. You get those layers of fat and connective tissue. It's just so gelatinous, so rich. You want to be very gentle at this stage, not to break up your meat. So this stage comes from Marco, where he always liked to have his pies with large chunks of meat, and I can really resonate with that. Quite often you get pies where you'll get this sort of meat, and then they'll keep mixing it. And the beauty of passing off the sauce and finishing the sauce separately is that you can get the perfect desired consistency on your sauce without breaking up your meat. Quite often you'll end up getting almost like a bolognese ragu texture because they're trying to season with all the meat still in there, and you'll just keep working it and it'll keep breaking apart. So just going to fish out the rest of that meat. So I'm just going to pour the stock through the colander and then just let that stock just pass through. And I'm going to discard the vegetables and the herbs. We do carrots, even though we cut those so chunky. Like for me, eating that is just not the most pleasurable thing. Like it's so soft, it's so mushy. It does taste great, but I think we can do better than that. Going to remove the meat once it's all drained. If you haven't cooked with these cuts of meat before, I would highly, highly recommend it. They really are absolute king for this sort of dish. You can get short ribs in your local supermarkets now more and more regularly. Ox cheek might be something slightly more specialist that you need to get from a butcher's. Like a little bit of the rosemary and thyme sticking on the meat is absolutely fine. We're just going to put our sauce into a pan and then we'll bring that up to the boil. Just get it to a rolling simmer and turn our sauce down. What we're going to do is we're going to just remove a little bit of the excess fat and we're going to use this fat to make our beurre manié, which is basically a roux, but without melting the butter and cooking out the flour on the stove. 50 gram quantity of fat and then 50 gram quantity of flour, so equal parts. And then we're just going to work that into a paste. So it's just equal quantities of fat and plain flour. Right, so we're going to take once the stock is reduced, we're then going to take a little bit of that stock and pour it onto our beurre manié and make a little bit of a paste so that the beurre manié will easily disperse into our sauce. Basically a looser paste, and this is going to ensure we don't get any lumps. That's a nice smooth paste now. I'm just going to add 1 spoon to start with. So once you should see the consistency change slightly straight away. I'm going to add another spoon. Just whisk in that beurre manié and then let it simmer nicely and see how it thickens up. Your sauce should thicken much quicker than that of other thickening methods, such as making a roux. It also doesn't clump because we've made this nice slurry that evenly disperses. It looks like actually I'm going to be able to add all of my beurre manié into this batch. I'm going to season my sauce as well with a touch of salt, some freshly ground pepper, and a touch more of the Worcester sauce. Just going to give a nice little kick. So going to simmer that for a couple of minutes and our sauce should be ready. While our sauce is warming through, we're just going to prep a few carrots, which we're going to lightly brown off in a pan, ready to go through our pie. So we're just going to just cut the carrots into quarters. So I'm just going to chop a few tips of thyme, and then we've got a few button mushrooms as well, which we've just cut in half. Our sauce is set aside now, our meat is braised and chilling. I'm just going to heat up a large non-stick pan and we're going to fry off some mushrooms in that pan. You just want to get a beautiful golden roast on those mushrooms. A little touch of oil, no seasoning to start with, medium-high heat. Now the reason we're doing this is we want to cook the mushrooms beautifully. We want that nice golden caramelization on them without them being complete mush. If we braise them from the start in that sauce, we'd have a very overcooked vegetable garnish. And personally, with my braises, I like to have things that have been cooked a little bit less and have a little bit more bite to them. Once our mushrooms have got a nice little bit of colour on them, we're then going to go in with some carrots. And at this stage, we're going to go in with a nice generous pinch of salt, good few twists of pepper, a couple of knobs of butter. Okay, once the carrots have got a little bit of colour, we're going to go in with a nice generous pinch of thyme. Again, all these sort of flavours are completely personal. I love thyme, so I go quite heavy on that. So you almost want to over season all the elements as you're going. Similar like when you're doing potato dishes, you always want to go a little bit over on the seasoning. So I'm just going to decant our garnish into a bowl ready for building our pie later. Okay, so our pastry has been chilling overnight in the fridge. Dust the surface with flour on top of our dough. Slowly roll this out. So what we're looking for here is we want a nice thick pastry. So we're looking for about 5 mil. This is a very high fat content pastry, so you need to work fast. They always say that pastry chefs have notoriously cold hands. So if you have cold hands, then you're maybe in the wrong career. You're going to lift up our dough and lay it over the top of our mould. I'm just going to line this with a little bit of butter. Just going to take a knob of butter, very lightly brush that around the outside of the pie mould. Just helps it to be non-stick, into the corners, like so. I'm just going to lift up our pastry onto the back of your hand. Then you're just going to place it over the top of the pie mould, just gently folding it into the dish. You don't want to rip it too much with your finger, so you're just going to go round, placing it into the corner, and then using the sort of side of your fingertip, you're going to push into the corners, lifting with one hand and pushing with the other. And at the same time, you're just going to very lightly push it into the side of the mould as well. Once it's into all the corners, then you're just going to go around with your forefinger and your thumb and just push very gently against the side of the pie mould and just pushing gently over the top like so. Where there's a fold, you just have to massage it out slightly, and then just going to go around with a knife and just trim round, leaving about just a slight overhang. And once you've sort of got rid of that overhang, you can then just go around and just double check it again. So again, the key areas are where the pastry folds over each other. You just want to go around and make sure it's not too thick. And then what we're going to do next is we're going to then chill this down, because we want the pastry to firm up again so we can put the lid on. Massaging it nicely. You can sort of feel where it's thick, and just with the back of your hand, just be really gentle. You don't want to go in with your fingers. Just the backs of your hand, the sides of your knuckles, pushing it into all the corners. So we're going to place this into the fridge now to fully set. It should probably take around 20 to 30 minutes. While the base is setting in the fridge, we're now just going to get on and make the lid. So you probably need about half the amount of pastry as you had before. I'm just going to follow exactly the same process. Use a plate and just cut around just so you get a rough lid shape. Flour that up, place it onto a bit of parchment and then just put that into the fridge to chill. Okay, so we're going to select the best short rib that we've got here. And this is going to be our one for presentation. That one's going to stick right in the middle of our pie, so we're going to keep that one whole as it is. And then with the remaining meat, we're just going to break it into some large chunks, keeping it nice and big. So it's going to cut it into some nice chunks, so you can just pull that off the bone like so. Should break away really, really nicely. Beautiful. All those bits of fat here, all that connective tissue is all going to melt down once the pie is warm. Bear in mind this is cold as well. So you can imagine how juicy that's going to be once it's drenched in that beautiful Guinness sauce. So we've got our cooked braised short rib and ox cheek. We've got our lovely roasted carrots, mushrooms and thyme. We've got our caramelised onions, and then we've got our sauce which we've finished and thickened. So we're going to take half our onions and we're just going to place those on the base of the pie. I just spread them out nicely. We're going to put our short rib directly into the middle, lining that bone to come straight out the centre. Then we're just going to layer this beef up around the outside, leaving enough gaps for this for the sauce to find its way through. A couple of spoons of garnish. Okay, so gone in with a nice little layer of sauce. I'm just going to keep going in with more meat, some more onions, alternating between sauce, mushrooms, beef, onions. I'm not going to overfill it too much because we don't want to run the risk of when the sauce boils or when the sauce is steaming with inside the pastry case that the sauce is going to break the seal. So we're probably going to go only about 75–80% of the way up with the sauce. Just do a little bit more meat towards the very centre of the pie. And what that's going to do is it's just going to help to rise the centre of the pastry up. Obviously the bone is completely optional. Just think it looks quite cool. So then with the flap, I'm just going to gently fold that back. And you want to make sure your lid is obviously wide enough to cover it, which ours is. And then I'm just going to put a little slit in where the bone's going to be. And then we're going to egg wash round the rim of the pie. That's going to help the lid stick. And then we're going to go around and just do the underside of the lid as well. Maximum adhesion for the lid. Making sure to get the bone done first. And then set the lid on top of the, spacing it out nicely. Gently prying out the lid, bringing it over the other edge, and then we're just going to slowly work our way around the rim, gently sticking the two bits of pastry together. Now we want to make sure that it's firm and set, but also not pushing down so much that it becomes too thin and brittle. Then I'm going to remove a little bit of this excess so we can start to make the final seal. So with a sharp knife, you're just going to go around and just trim it on a slight angle, running your knife slightly against the edge of the pie mold. And I'm just going to grab a fork, press the seal down, make sure it's completely set. Then just going to go around one final time with a nice sharp knife. Oh yeah, now we're rocking. And then this time you're going to get really tight to the case. This is the Fallow techers for the pie. Crimp the edges, we've made it as tight as possible. We've gone for a nice, rustic, really simple presentation. Something that's really achievable at home. The last thing we do is we're just going to cover our bone with a bit of tin foil, just so that bone doesn't get scorched. That'll be then removed for presentation. And then we're going to put this back into the fridge to set before we bake it, to make sure that pastry is completely set and cold and not warm, because that pastry will start to melt. Okay, so pie's been chilling in the fridge now for an hour. Just going to glaze this now with a little bit of egg wash. So we've given our pie a nice little glaze, and then we're just going to pop that into an oven, sit at 160 degrees. And we're going to check it after 40 minutes. Looking good. Nice. So this has been cooking now at 160 degrees. So we've gone low and slow because we really want to get that suet pastry super, super crispy. So this has been cooking for about 90 minutes. Now we're going to want to let this sit probably for at least sort of 15 to 20 minutes just to let those juices relax. Otherwise, if we cut it straight away, it's all just going to burst out. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to almost release the side of this tart mold. This is probably about a 10-inch mold, give or take. So I'm just going to release the sides just to let it cool down slightly. Ooh. So our pie has now cooled down and we're going to cut it open. I'm going to remove the bone. Oh. Perfection. Bone was there for presentation. So obviously it looks great if you put that into in the middle of a table as a centerpiece. Right, let's taste this. So you can see how soft that meat is. You've got the cheek there, it just breaks apart. That pastry is so thick, look at that. The low, slow cook really helps to develop that deep, thick crust. It almost has like a proper crunch to it, that pastry. So buttery, really flaky, because if you haven't overworked pastry, the meat just falls apart, so soft. Has a slight bitterness from the ale, sweetness from the red wine, and those garnishes are just nice, and are still like almost slightly al dente. The ultimate steak and ale pie.